Hello, welcome to the Creative Toolbox. My name is Shane Semler, and this is the show where I share with you tips and techniques for making the most of your creative software. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a sci-fi space scene. It can be used as a backdrop in a more complex scene, and it's going to be something like the background you see in, this is an image I created for a book last year. And here is another example of the sort of background we'll be working on. So I started out with a sketch, a couple sketches actually. I did a black and white one, and then I did a color one because I wanted to think about the types of the tone and color that I want to go with. Let's get started. We're starting in Photoshop. And we are working with a canvas size of 1940 by 1092. And since this is going to be shrunk down for viewing on the web, I want to do it a little, I'm doing it at twice the size that the final version will be. All right, first of all, let's just put in some black here. Let's make a new layer. Make sure we have a brush selected. One of these hard-edged brushes. These are just the default standard brushes. We're not going to be using any special brushes for this, so you can work with just the default setup. Now, we want to make our spacing really high. I'm going to turn transfer off. And we are not going to draw. Also make your brush size very small. Now we're not going to draw like this. We are going to also set your opacity to 100 and turn off your pressure. We do want the size to change, so set your size jitter to 100%. All right, what we are going to do is we're going to do this the long, tedious way, and there really is no quick way to do this if you want your stars to look good. Now we're starting out with a slightly bigger brush, and then we will go in with a smaller brush on another layer. Create a new layer, and we're going to, well, actually first we need to put a gray background, or fill our layer with gray, and then we are going to add noise. So just crank that up to 200 uniform. All right, there's our color, but these are all too small, so our next step is to blur it a little bit. We'll use a Gaussian blur. 10's too high. Let's go with 3. And then we'll go to adjustments, hue and saturation, crank the saturation up. Not all the way, because that's just too much. Put it up right about there, 85 or 86. Now we go to multiply, and there we go. Colored stars. Now that's a little bit too intense, so let's take our opacity down. And there we go. We have multicolored stars. Still might be. We just want a hint. It gives it depth, and you don't have just the plain white star thing going on. All right, now we are going to create the nebula that goes in the background with the stars. Let's take a look at our sketch, see what we got. So these nebulas are sort of like streaks behind the planet. And I'll be doing the same thing that I did here, except in more detail. So let's go into how that is done. All right, create a new layer. And we have to get a brush. Again, this is just the stock brushes, default set, and we're going to use 45. This one right here is 45 pixels. Kind of cloudy looking. Now, if you have a custom cloud brush, go ahead and use that. It might work better. But we need to bump up the angle jitter. Bring up the spacing a bit, not too high. Right about in there, looks good. And the scattering a little bit, just a hair, not a lot. All right. And I think there's a little bit of green in there, so let's make another layer and go with a sort of greenish color. Also, let's add that blue gradient in that was in the background. All right. Now, I'm going to use the smear brush. Now, I made a brush for that, and I'll show you how I did it. We get this one right here, this bristly 46 pixel brush. Oops, turn up scattering just a bit. Shape dynamics, set the angle jitter all the way up. Spacing, actually let's leave the spacing as is. Now, strangely enough, you want to knock the strength down. You don't want to go up too high with this to get this sort of smooth. We're going to go over and smooth some areas. So that way there are some hard edges and some soft edges. And if you look at some Hubble images, you see that. You'll see like areas where dust and gas is sort of hard edged, and then other areas where it's soft. So we're going through and doing that sort of look. All right, now we're going to use one of my favorite things, is Liquify. Liquify is awesome. I love Liquify. It's especially useful for organic or sort of cloudy things, dust and smoke. All right, making a new layer, and let's go in with some black. All right, so we're done here for now. Let's head on over to Blender and create our planet. Okay, here we are in Blender. We are going to create a 3D planet to put into our space background scene. First of all, let's delete that square, our cube, and we are going to add a UV sphere. Let's put that in the center. Add that again. Add a UV sphere. Okay. It doesn't really matter the size. We can leave it at its basic size here. Now, switch it to smooth shading. And we are going to add a modifier to up the subdivision so we don't get the hard corners. And there we go. So that's resolution there, which is pretty good. All right, now let's alter this a bit. We're going to make this our node editor. And this one is going to be our rendered 3D display. Oh yeah, by the way, make sure you select the cycles render. And rendered. All right, so. Oh, and make sure, if you can, use your GPU for rendering. All Right, now we are not going to use any textures for this, so we don't need to UV unwrap this. We're going to use a built-in procedural textures. All right, so we're going to create a new texture, or a new material, and we're going to call this Cloud Planet. Cloud Planet. All right. So, first thing we need to do is we need to add a noise texture. So, select noise. And this is going to go here. All right, so we already got a cloudy background thing going on here. But we need some color on it. So we are going to add where is it? No. Color RGB curves. That's what we want. All right, we're going to put this RGB curves between the noise and the diffuse. We're going to pull the red down, pull the green down a little bit, and push up the blue. All right. We're going to set the scale to 0.5. The detail to 16. And the distortion to 19. All right, that's looking pretty good so far. Now, for some reason, when you use, what we're going to be using is for our mapping. Let's go to input. No, mapping is under vector. Mapping here, and then our input, input texture coordinates, we're going to use generated. Put that into the vector. And for our scale on the mapping, we're going to go on the X 6.5. So you can see right away we got this really awesome swirly cloud thing going on, which looks pretty darn cool. Now, for some reason, it doesn't work by the poles. Instead, it goes through the X coordinate, and I have no idea why, but it doesn't matter. We can fix that just by rotating it like this. So it makes it a little easier for us to deal with. Oh, there we go. Now we could just stop there, but we want to add a displacement, just a subtle one, not really, not too much, but just a little bit. It's going to be barely noticeable. So this is just default, but that's too extreme. So what we do is we go to we go to converter, math, put it in there, put this into the lower value, and switch this to multiply. And we want to set this value to about 0.01. Again, it's very, very subtle. I suppose you could bump it to 0.02 if you wanted to. All right, so this is our plant so far. We're not done yet, though. We need to add a few more things. We need to go to our world settings, and we're going to bump this up a little bit so we can see what we're doing. We want, since in our background, our 2D part of the background, we have like this dark blue gradient. We're going to use that as our ambient light. source. Now, in space, you don't actually get ambient light sources like this unless it's light reflecting off of something, but we're not creating reality here. We're creating something, cool looking. All right. Now, it's not bright enough, so let's go to our light. We'll switch this to a sun lamp, and that's looking pretty good. Let's move our camera. Right now, it's not in a good spot for what we want to do. We want to set it up as close to what we have in our sketch as possible. So, what we're going to do is we're going to add an empty. I'm just using plain access. Select that. Object, parent, and track, and track to constraint. Oops, wrong one. Gotta select them backwards. That, then that, object, track to constraint. Okay. Select our camera. I'm going to grab it. Line it up to about there. Let's pull back a little bit. Select our empty and get it to the approximate place it is in our sketch, which is right about there. And our lighting is more from the top and more from this side. So that looks pretty good. That looks about like what we have in our image. Let's rotate this so it lines up more with what we have. That looks pretty good. We got a nice swirly cloud thing going on. Let's rotate it a little bit. I tend to not to go super precise with a lot of this stuff because, I mean, why? I do that to myself. Imperfection is part of what makes art interesting. That looks pretty good. So we got our ambient. Now, if we just rendered this like this, all this blue would render. So we don't want that. We need to go to the camera icon here and scroll down. Set the film, this one right here, to transparent. Now that won't render. Now let's get our size. I mean, we could render it like this, but for the sake of OCD, let's get, well, you know what? No, we don't need to do that. It's not really important since we're going to line it up anyway. So this is big enough. Our actual size, I think, is like 1920 by 1020 something, 1040. I don't know. I don't have the image in front of me right now, but this is close enough. We're going to render it this, set this to 100, and let's give this a render. Oh, no. First, we need to go to sampling and set our render. I usually go for about 700 to start off with. If that doesn't work, then I'll go bump it up higher. Clamp indirect. I always set it at 1. Some people set it higher. 1 always seems to work for me. I think that is everything. Let's render this. Okay, we are back in Photoshop, and we are going to open our render here. And this is how it came out. Looks pretty good. But we're not done with it. So let's drop it into our star background. All right, there we go. It looks pretty good. Let's take a look at our sketch and see what it says. Okay, well, the planet is a lot brighter, and it's a little bit bigger. We can get away with scaling it up just a little bit. We could re-render it, but we're not going to. We're just going to go back to here, scale it a little bit, zoom in to see how that looks. So that's past 100. So yeah, it still looks good. It holds up. All right, see, now you can see that we have, instead of a black shadow, it's a dark bluish, which is good, and it looks like it matches up to our background quite well. Now, it's kind of dark, so we're going to adjust the gamma on it. So we're going to go to levels. Some people prefer to do this stuff with curves. I prefer to use levels, so we're going to bump the gamma up a little bit. All right, what we need to do now is we need to give it a glow, because planets tend to have an upper atmosphere that sort of extends out a little bit. And also, it'll separate it from the background more. And the easiest and quickest way to do that is to just, in Photoshop, you can't do this in GIMP. There is a plugin you can get that has similar behavior, but we are going to use outer glow. We're going to set this to not white. We're going to go with blue. We need to bump up saturation. Now, this isn't terribly realistic having it glow on this side, but we're not so worried about realism here. We're worried about it looking good. So we get that nice separation between the background and the foreground with this glow. But we're still not done quite yet. Something else that you get on planets is, as you look through the atmosphere, it tends to get, you're looking through more atmosphere towards the edges. Because when you're looking straight on, you're looking through a thinner amount of atmosphere. So what we need to do is we need to add like a slight, well, basically a slight inner glow. But we're not going to use inner glow. In this case, and the reason why, this gives us a little bit more control than you would have with just inner glow. We are going to do a fill. We're going to use another, again, a light blue. All right. And now, I'm going to select. We actually need the ruler. We're going to snap. You should have snap on. Make sure you have snap under view menu. We're going to do this. And under select, we are going to modify feather. And let's try a feather of, let's try 40. That might be a little bit much, but rid of that. And switch this screen and bump this to about right there. That looks pretty good. Now, it's given us a problem here in the shadow. So what we're going to do is we're just going to erase that. That's a quick way to deal with that problem. Just going to erase it. Pick a really smooth feathered brush. And then we're just going to, oops, heavy. Knock down this opacity. Really big. And there we go. That looks pretty good. More. All right. That's looking pretty good. All right, now let's do a few more tweaks to our stars and nebula in the background. With the stars, we're going to drop the opacity down as they're a little bit too bright. So that's our smaller stars, and these are going to be knocked down too. That's a little bit too much. Back up. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's make this. All right, that looks pretty good. With a few more tweaks, this is our final image. Well, that's all the time we have. See you next time on the Creative Toolbox. Thanks for watching.